Well, hello, people, and welcome to an episode of Art Jam. I'm Alex, and I am doing Art Jam solo this week, so hopefully things are going to work and behave okay. And basically, what I think I'm going to talk about today or do is probably play in ZBrush for a little while, and then sort of take it from there. But basically, I've got a project that I've been working on that I started. I guess in May, I started the Unreal Fellowship, and for about 5 weeks, I learned Unreal, which I hadn't used before, which was really, really cool. And basically, everybody that's in the Unreal Fellowship has to make a short. And so since a month is a really short period of time, you kind of do a mixture of using assets from Marketplace and Megascans and Bridge. And then I came up with something that's using a little bit of my own stuff. But I wasn't able to completely finish the project that I came up with. I was kind of a little overly ambitious, so I still have some things left to work on. And so I think what I'm going to do first is share what I made for the fellowship, just show that so that we're all on the same page and you kind of know what I'm talking about. And then I'll probably just keep working on it. So before I do that, just hello, Sir Saito. I guess my audio is working, hopefully, and you guys can hear me okay. So just anybody can just give a thumbs up that we're okay and that I'm not muted or anything. Let's see. All right, awesome. Thank you for confirming that, Shoku. Then, all right, let me show my thing that I made for the fellowship, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. So let's see if this works. All right, so there you go. So that's the thing I made for the Unreal Fellowship, and which was really, really cool to be able to finally learn how to use Unreal after years and years of wanting to and seeing it get cooler and cooler. And I've been a Maya artist for a long time, so I've been using Maya since it was Alpha 3, so before it came out back in like the late 90s. And obviously over the last few years, between not just game stuff, but virtual production and things like knowing that Unreal is being used for backgrounds on shows like The Mandalorian, and now with Unreal 5 and all the cool stuff that's coming, it became pretty clear that Unreal would be a really cool thing to learn. And so I only know a tiny bit of Unreal, to be honest, because Unreal is a huge program, and in a 5-week class, which is basically what Epic puts together, there's only so much you can learn because you're also trying to make something. So I'd say like the main thing I learned with Unreal was scene assembly, like being able to put things together. And hello, people. It's like just, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat. So Renderman, Navigator, Rue Cruz, Virtual Russell. So hello, everybody. So yeah, so basically I learned a bit about scene assembly, really, really cool that, with Unreal, since it's free, there's also the marketplace. And so let me share my screen, and let's go and get that going. So I'm going to share it this way, and let's get rid of that graphic on the bottom. Don't need to see that. All right, so now you can see my desktop. But let's go and look into Unreal. So with Unreal, yeah, there's marketplace, so there's all these things you can grab. So I think, just to be clear, that when I say that I made that in a month, there's certain things that I made and there's certain things that I didn't make. And so let me try and sort of be clearer about that. So I'm going to actually just open the short as a video. So let me grab that real quick. And let's go to where I have all my renders. Okay, here we go. So this is what I just showed you guys. So basically, if I go through and we look at, a shot, there's certain things in here that I made and certain things that I didn't. I did decide, even though they recommended for the fellowship to just have everything that you use be from the marketplace, meaning that you can go, and let me launch the Epic launcher as well, because I want to make sure we're, for those of you who don't use Unreal, you kind of know what that means as well. So if you install Unreal on your computer, then you're going to get the launcher. And in the launcher, you're going to have Marketplace. And then in Marketplace, there's going to be a ton of stuff, some of which is free and some of which you have to buy. Most of the stuff in here is relatively affordable. There is a lot of free stuff. So if I go in here and go, let's say, to Megascans, you can see all these things that are free that you can grab. So that's what they kind of recommended for the fellowship was, rely on the free stuff you can get as much as possible. Maybe download some environments. And so I decided that I would definitely use Marketplace and Bridge for set dressing, but that I would try to build the environment myself. And so if we look at something or look at the short, and let me get Unreal open, and let me then get that video as well, then I did not make the horse, I didn't make the character, but I made the environment. But then like the little set dressing that we see inside here, and then I'm going to go and let this play, but lower the volume down. So as this is playing, we go through, then the environment that we're seeing inside here, like whether it's the island in the background or the foreground, that's all stuff that some of it I built and some of it I used Megascans. And so in here, like that bridge is something that I made, something that I ZBrushed. But then this foreground object or this foreground statue head is something that I got off of Megascans Bridge. And Megascans is a service from Quixel. Quixel is a company that was acquired by Epic. And they basically scan lots of stuff. They've got thousands of scans. So what we're looking at here is a sort of cliff where I sculpted the cliff in ZBrush and textured it in Mixer, but then the foreground little rocks and little plants I grabbed from Bridge. And that's kind of the easiest way to sort of explain it. So it's a combination of things that I did make and things that I didn't. Here we're looking at something that's mostly me ZBrushing some cliffs, texturing it in Mixer, and then the statues are things that came from Bridge. And I'm going to go and see if I can grab Bridge real quick, just so you can see what that looks like. And so just waiting for that to launch. Here we go. And so if I launch Bridge, and Bridge is free, so it used to cost money, and I think it still does if you're using the assets with something like Maya, but if you're using the assets with something like Unreal, it's free. And if you look at the top in Bridge, it says search 15,000 assets. So there's a lot of stuff in here, and everything is scan-based. So if you look for, let's say, surfaces, these are going to be like materials that you can apply to your own objects. And then if you go inside here and you look at 3D assets, then these are all photogrammetry acquired assets. And I've done talks with Gnomon before about photogrammetry. I've been into it for a little while, which basically means scanning stuff using a camera. It can be a cell phone camera these days, but for super high resolution stuff, you don't want to use a proper, like, DSLR. But anyway, there's a ton of stuff in here. And the nice thing is that getting this stuff from Bridge into Unreal is really simple. It's also really simple to get it over to Maya, which is what I've been doing for years. And then now I'm just over the last couple months doing it with Unreal. So a whole bunch of stuff. So basically, that's what when I say that these statues are coming from Bridge, that's where it's coming from. So I had to do scene assembly, and then obviously camera movement, camera animation, some effects animation like the rain, or the flags. And then the animation that we're seeing inside here is mostly coming from motion capture clips that you can get at places like Mixamo or ActorCore or from Marketplace. So the whole experience of making this was kind of one of being a director, right? Where a director doesn't necessarily design everything that's in a shot. They don't, there's going to be props that come from a prop house. There's going to be people doing set dressing. And so that's kind of how I look at the work that a lot of people do in the fellowship, is that you're on such a tight schedule that you just don't have the time to make everything yourself. And so, but ultimately all of these shots, I'm still art directing them. I'm still figuring out the camera work. It's all based on storyboards that I did. And so it was a new experience for me because, in the past, most of my personal work has been me doing things based on, like, I'll do my own concept and I'll make an image based on that, where I make everything, like I'll model and texture and light and do everything from scratch. And that's kind of what I've always done, where using other people's stuff like kit bashing just wasn't something I got into. I like to make my own libraries and kit bash my own stuff. And so this was like my first experience kit bashing using other people's assets. And it was super, super fun. And there's obviously a lot of companies out there that are making these libraries because it's becoming a more and more popular thing to do. So this shot that had the time lapse going on with the sky and the change of the time of day, last week I mentioned the ultra dynamic sky, which is something you can get on Marketplace, which is really, really cool and allows you to change the time of day, change the weather, and it has everything from stars to rain to snow, all in a project that you can get off Marketplace for like $30. It's not free, but it's really, really cool. So in this shot, I basically just animated the time of day. And, I needed to play a lot with a lot of the settings just to get it to look the way I wanted, because there's a million sliders. But, and then the fire is something that I got some fire packs from Marketplace, and then just had to learn how to adjust them to look the way I wanted them to look. So just Marketplace is full of things that give you a good start point. And then the time of day changes to nighttime. And so I needed a bunch of candles. And what's nuts with Unreal and everything that you're seeing here is, before I used Unreal, being a Maya person, using, V-Ray, Redshift, different renderers that I've used over the years, those all take a while to render. And so it's just crazy that, everything that you're seeing in this, short is rendering in real time. So this is a a couple minutes of animation that takes a couple minutes to render. Maybe like 3 or 4 minutes if you crank the anti-aliasing, but it's still crazy fast. So what we can see is going on in here is that, it's called Tartarus, and Tartarus is kind of like the underworld in sort of Greek mythology. And so there's a larger story that I came up with. And so it's not really evident what's going on just based on what I've made so far. It's basically a dude is on a cliff, he crosses the bridge, he goes to a cave. But the title hopefully just implies like, okay, this is ancient Greece, and he's heading to the underworld for a reason that we don't quite know. But in the storyboards and the idea I came up with, there's actually a whole bunch before what's happening here, where before he gets to this cliff, and then things that happen once he goes into that cave. And so those are the things I didn't get to. And so that's where I'm going to probably spend my time today, is working on some of that. So at the end of this, if we get back here and we can see this cave, it's basically a cave to the underworld. Not specifically, it's a cave that gets us to basically this kind of sort of halfway point between, the real world and the underworld. And so, which in my story, I was just calling the bleak divide, just a sort of dark area where sort of spirits kind of get stuck, kind of like purgatory. And so the figures that we have inside here are figures that have been sort of on their way to the underworld, but kind of got stuck. And once he gets down into that area, there's going to be a lot more. So if I jump over to Maya, all right. So Maya is what I used to do my layout, and basically meaning that and I showed this a little bit last week. If I go inside here, you can see that I have to kind of block out what is the scale of my environment, and based on that, block out simple objects in Maya that I could then ZBrush and then send over to Unreal. And so if we look at this guy, and I just go and let's hide polygons for a second, then you can see there's the cliff that we just kind of went down, and then there's this cave entrance. And then what you can see is a big staircase going all the way down to the bottom. And then when he gets to the bottom is where he has to travel across this dark, bleak area before he gets to a chamber that would allow him to use a portal to actually get to Tartarus, is basically my idea. And say, Sadim, when you say, can I show the title again, do you mean the title of the short? It was Tartarus. And which, can also be Hades. And so, but I think Hades is a word that I was very familiar with, and I was less familiar with it being called Tartarus. And so that's where I decided to use a word that I was just a little less familiar with. So in here, we didn't get to the stair part. And so that's kind of what I'm working on. So if I get the geometry back, so these are the things that I already had ZBrushed and sent over to Unreal, things like the bridge. And then over here, we can see, the cave entrance where we are at the end. So you can see that this is something that I ZBrushed and textured in Mixer, while everything else that's around it on that island are things that come from Megascan Bridge. So we need to kind of get inside that cave. And so, and then let's see, Saito, Dante vibes, totally. So Gustave Doré is definitely something that's like an inspiration for where we're gonna end up. And let's go over to Unreal. So, and then of course, the navigation hotkeys are different for Unreal and Maya, so it's really weird going back and forth. But I'm in Unreal, and so, which obviously is got a prettier viewport than Maya. And what I have open right now is a Unreal project where I've started to experiment with the stairs, which I showed a little bit last week. And so inside here, if I go to stair test, and load this in. So I've loaded the project, but I didn't load the level. So now I'm just loading the level. All right, so now this level is loaded. And actually, I guess I can have some music playing just so there's some background music. I don't know if you guys are even going to hear it, but I just like to have some music playing. So yeah, so I'm in Unreal, and if I click play, just so we can basically control a character and move around, then right now I'm basically at the bottom of the stairs. Let me make it full screen. And so I had to do some experimenting to figure out how I would do such a huge staircase without needing like a massive amount of geometry. And so basically I was able to figure out how to do it using a tileable displacement map. And so that's what's going on these stairs. So this is actually a flat plane that's just rotated 40 degrees, and it's really big. And then it's a tileable 8K displacement. So, and then I have some layered shaders on it, so it's kind of changes. It's not the same everywhere. But what's cool is I was able to make a really, really big staircase. Not that we're going to interact with it this way, because it'll be part of the short. And so there'll be different shots that would, a couple shots that would incorporate the staircase. But I just needed to sort of figure out how to approach it. So let me go and get out of that mode. So if I just move the camera around, I'm going to go actually, let's get our interface back. I've got some black fog in the scene. And so that's kind of what is limiting our visibility. And so if I turn it off, now it becomes a little bit clearer that, yeah, it's just a big piece of geometry, but it's basically got a displacement map on it. So if I go and select that piece of geometry, it's actually fairly heavy. So if you look on the right on the outliner, it says stairs flat 300K. So it's 300,000 polys. Because in order for the displacement map to catch all the detail that's in the stairs, I kind of needed to do that. So if I double click on the shader that's on the stairs, then basically we can see that. Let's go inside here. And let's see, where's the displacement settings? There we go. So I just turned off the displacement. So now you can see it's really just a flat piece of geometry. So it's pretty cool. Like, I thought that was pretty cool that Unreal can handle, real-time tiling displacements that are 8K on a 300,000 poly piece of geometry and be flying around at 60 frames per second, because Maya can't do that. I can do it at render time, but it's not in viewport. Anyway, so I thought that was kind of cool. So, oh, hey, Gregor. So it's cool that you're in here. Nice to see you. So it's Unreal is rad. I mean, after years of using Maya, it's just a trip to be doing things and not be waiting on renders. It's really, really cool. So I think I still have a lot to learn about like where that line is between what you do in Maya and what you do in Unreal, because there are definitely certain things that I'd still need to do in Unreal. It seems like over time, more and more stuff is going to be coming. And so that's something that you hear a lot when people talk about Unreal. It's like, oh, you can't do that yet. So like the modeling tools are better in Maya than Unreal, but then people would caveat that as saying, for now. So we'll see. But, for now, still need to use Maya for certain things, and ZBrush for certain things, and Quixel Mixer for texturing. And it's awesome, though. The interchange between all of those works pretty well. So where was I going? Basically, I still need to set dress this area. So now that I figured out the stairs, then basically he needs to sort of get across this area to the other side. And I think what's going to make it easier for you to follow along is, let me see if I can get my storyboards up. And so I'm going to go into, let's see, it's been a while. There we go. No, not there. Storyboards. All right, so here's my boards. I'm going to start where we were at the cliff. So that's going to be shot 22. So based on the storyboards I did for this project, what I ended up having be my final actually starts at shot 22. So I never got to all of this stuff. So that shows me being a little overly ambitious, and it was just based on, not knowing what I was going to be able to get done. And then I wanted to come up with something that I felt I could just keep working on when the fellowship ended. So I kind of realized pretty quickly, like, there's no way I'm getting this done, but I'm just going to try and see what I can do. And so basically what I did get done is shot 22 to shot 27. So I actually, what ended up being, only a few shots became a lot more. So if I go in here and open this up, this is where he's basically at the edge of the cliff. And if we go through here, then he's going down the cliff. This is actually a drawing that I did for Inktober last year, and that's where the whole idea for the short came from. And then he crosses the bridge, but you can see, like, from here to here in my storyboards, and once I finally got to animating it and putting the whole thing together, it felt like it needed a few more shots to explain how he got down the bridge, or how he got down the cliff. And then he crosses the bridge, and then immediately goes up the stairs. And it's when I was working on it that I thought it would be cool to change the time of day. And so that's where I had to kind of slow down for a second and explain how the time of day would change. And that's where I thought maybe he would rest before continuing the journey into the cave. So once he gets to the cave entrance, then basically we cut to being inside the cave and looking at his silhouette. So this is a shot I haven't done yet. And then he's moving down the stairs. And so, and then on the stairs would be figures as we're outside outside, and then more. And so this is that staircase with rocks as well as figures on them. So now definitely getting into like Gustave Doré vibe, because Dante's Inferno and the Gustave Doré illustrations that he did for it is something I've been a huge fan of since high school. And so I thought it would be kind of cool to reference that a little bit. And so he gets to the bottom of the stairs and then begins to walk towards a glow on the horizon. And there's different figures. And so I'm not sure yet if these are going to be frozen or if maybe some of them will be moving or animated. So basically figures that are in a state of grief or a state of suffering. The name of the chamber that I gave that he's going to is the chamber of, or the cave of forgotten sorrow is basically where he is. And so the story that I came up with ultimately has to do with grief and suffering, and the death of his wife and him going to the underworld to get her back. So something that is the general premise of what's going on. And funny enough, like a couple weeks ago, I've been reading Sandman by Neil Gaiman, which how I've waited this long to read it, I don't know, but I'm finally reading it. And there was actually a story in Sandman that was similar to that, which I thought was surprising and cool. Anyway, so he's going across this sort of dark area with figures that are in a state of suffering until he finally sees an entrance on the other side where there is a glow. And that's what I started working on sculpting last week. And so he's going to get to this cave entrance, and then inside the cave there's basically going to be this entrance. And so there's going to be like the skull of a titan or something like that, that he's going to approach. And so I've kind of blocked out this cave in Maya, and so I still need to ZBrush all this stuff and get it into Unreal. So this is something that I'll be working on, I guess, over the next few weeks. I don't get to work on this full time anymore because the fellowship ended and I've got a bunch of Gnomon stuff to do. But I'll at least be working on the streams, and hopefully the streams keep me motivated to spend time in the evenings and weekends working on it. And so basically there's more that happens after he gets to this point, but that's kind of what I think I'm going to be working on is this sort of cave. So with that said, if I jump over to Maya, then in here, I basically used my storyboards to block out my environment. So if I go, let's say, to shot 22, we can see there's the storyboard, and then I kind of blocked out geometry to go with it. And so I'm going to go and jump to, let's say, shot 34. And this is where basically we can see, I don't know if I've got the geometry for this, but I have it in another scene. Let's see, where would it be? This is what happens when you're in a hurry and you don't name stuff. Let me go out here. There it is. So this is the inside of that chamber as I blocked it out. And so let me just go inside, get a little closer. Okay. So I don't have the skull of the Titan inside here yet, but for blocking things out, it's all fairly simple geometry. And so at least this part is done. So just figuring out what is the simple geometry I need that lays out and matches to my storyboard and matches to the image plane that I did. And then each of these pieces are ready to be ZBrushed and textured. And so I'm using Maya to do my layout just because I'm more comfortable for now with Maya's navigation and modeling tools and pivot points and snapping and all that kind of stuff, which I could have done in Unreal probably. When I started doing layout, I didn't know Unreal at all, and I just felt I needed to at least do this part in Maya. So if we go outside here, then we can see this is kind of the entrance to that chamber. And then there's another larger wall, and then obviously the larger extent of it. So maybe I'll have to do a little bit of sculpting on this as well, but this is what I started last week. So that kind of gets everybody up to speed on what I'm working on. And I'm, kind of new to, I've done a couple art jams with Josh over the last, year, but Josh is the one who's been streaming regularly. So still getting used to, talking to myself in front of the computer, but hopefully you guys are, hey, there's Josh. Hello. Droids for sale. Let's see, and Unreal, there's no selection tool, just move, rotate, scale. Yeah, it's definitely different. And I'm just gonna scan it here just to see if I need to catch up on any comments. All pretty chill. All right. So yeah, so that's where I'm at. You guys are welcome to ask a question if you have any, because I am keeping an eye on the chat, or trying to. You can change the camera to behave like in Maya and Unreal. Yes, that's the first thing I had to learn how to do, or else I was going to go crazy. So yeah, because that's something in Unreal that, like, by default, it's inverted for the middle mouse button. And so that's like the first thing that I was asking the TAs, was just like, how do I invert the middle mouse button so it behaves like Maya? But the funny thing is that if you come from Maya to Unreal, you immediately want to hold down Alt and left, middle, right mouse button, because that's what you're used to. But then in Unreal, it's got another type of navigation, which is like in a video game where it's WASD to navigate. And it's awesome because it's just, once you get used to using a 3D program with sort of game type controls, it's pretty rad. So I've actually started, when I'm in Unreal, not using Maya controls anymore, not using Alt. So Elmo's trying to be an environmental concept art and trying to make 3D as well. Where do you start? So, well, I mean, I think that if you're interested in 3D environment art, then Unreal is actually a cool 3D program to learn for a few reasons. I mean, if you're really green, I would say Blender and Unreal, because Blender is free, Unreal is free. They're both pretty cool. Blender is getting a lot more powerful over the last couple of years. Unreal is obviously an industry standard tool, and tons of games have been made with Unreal. They all have environments, so obviously you definitely can be an environment artist using Unreal. And what's great about Unreal from a learning perspective is that in Marketplace, you're able to download these really well-made environments and sort of take them apart. And so, for example, if I go into the launcher, so I'm going to go into Marketplace real quick. So for any of you who are interested in learning about being an environment artist and like, what is an example of something that's good, like if I go in Marketplace and type in, see if this pops up, goddess. Yeah, Megascan Goddess Temple. So I already downloaded it. I'm pretty sure this is free. I think all the Megascan stuff is free. This is a really, really well-made environment that looks, you know what, I don't know if you guys hear the music, but for me, it's a little loud. So I'm just gonna chill that out a little bit. And now where to go? So being able to download things that are really well made and take them apart to see how they're put together is awesome. And that's something that I think is so cool about Unreal and the Marketplace. And there's several things in here. So if you're interested in being an environment artist and you're new to it, I think installing Unreal, watching some of the, basics of the interface, and there's a lot of videos on that, whether it's on YouTube or from the Learn tab in Marketplace. There's like a Unreal 101 that's like 2 hours. If you watch that, so just so you know how to like launch Unreal and move the camera around, start downloading some of these environments, and then you'll start to realize what you need to learn as you take them apart. And some of it's going to be like, modeling, texturing, lighting, rendering, all the regular stuff that's part of being a 3D artist. And it's kind of a nice overview to sort of start that way, I think. Ultimately, though, being an environment artist just means that you end up learning a lot of different tools because environments are full of a lot of different stuff, right? Environments can have kind of everything. There can be organic stuff like rocks and trees and plants. There can be man-made stuff like architecture. You need to learn about, things like atmospherics and atmospheric fog, or things like atmospheric effects that you might want in an environment. So there's a lot to learn, but I think that that would be a place to start. And then beyond that, I think that for a lot of people that are getting started, I think YouTube is where people tend to default to go. And then there's resources like the Gnomon Workshop that have lots of tutorials, and the web is full of tutorials these days, which is kind of nice. So the problem is finding, good ones. So, but they're out there for sure. So if you have a more specific question about environment art, happy to answer it. But yeah, I think that the Unreal Learning Portal is a very good place to start. So yeah, so I've got this sort of entrance to this chamber that I need to keep working on. And so I think that's what I'm going to do. And so wait, there's another question in here. Does that mean you've started using WASD in Maya? No, because Maya doesn't have those kind of controls. And so if I'm in Maya, W is the move tool. And so which is the standard hotkey for that. And as far as I know, they haven't added that kind of camera control in Maya. I could be wrong. So no, I'm in Maya. I'm still using, Alt and left, middle, right mouse button, because that's what I'm used to after so many years of using Maya. And so it's just using sort of the native navigation for each tool. Let's see. Wouldn't you want to create your own props rather than using it from Marketplace? Yeah, for sure. I definitely would rather make my own stuff. For the fellowship and for the short, as I mentioned, just didn't have enough time. And so that's why when we look at, a lot of these shots, like if I look at this, I didn't make him and I didn't make that statue in the background. I did retexture a lot of stuff that I downloaded using Quixel's Quixel's mixer, which is rad. But if I were going to make this short and I didn't have a time limit, I would make everything myself. Meaning I would design the character, model the character, etc. I just didn't have the time for it. And you're going to find that in production as well. So if you have enough of a budget, then yeah, it's great to go and hire designers and modelers and do everything from scratch. But there is a place for online model libraries, which is why they've existed for so long. whether it's back in the day with Viewpoint or these days with places like TurboSquid or Kitbash 3D. Sometimes people are in a hurry and they just need to use assets that already exist when possible. But obviously, if you're on a big budget project like something at ILM or Weta or Blizzard, the vast majority of stuff you see is going to be stuff that was built specifically for that project. So Maya walk tool controls can do WASD game-like control camera. Cool. I've never used that in Maya, so that is actually cool to know and something that I should try. I'm very curious to see over the coming months, like how my time gets split between Maya and Unreal, because I feel like at this point I'm going to be using Unreal as like my final scene assembly layout tool for final rendering, and that I would end up using Maya really just for initial blocking out or modeling or checking UV shells. And so I wonder how much rendering I'll be doing from Maya in the future. We'll see. So yeah, let's go back out here. So I think I'm going to work on this guy. So I have it open in, let's close all the stuff that I've opened. I've got it open in ZBrush. So this is now, of course, I'm in ZBrush. So now different camera controls again. So Unreal to Maya to ZBrush, and my brain's getting confused. Alt. So this is basically the entrance to that little chamber. Are there copyright limitations for marketplace assets? As far as I understand, anything that's on marketplace you can use for your own projects. I'm assuming that that's part of the agreement that the author of the content makes with Epic when they upload their stuff to marketplace, is that by putting it there and allowing people to buy it means that people can use it for their own projects, including professional projects. That's the impression that we were given in the Unreal Fellowship. So yeah, so I've got this, which again was blocked out in Maya. So this is something that hasn't been UV'd and hasn't been textured. And so it's really just, I just started to block it out. So if I go in here, the SDiv one, was pretty simple. And now I just need to sculpt on it a little bit. So what I'll do is work on this, and I'm not going to try and do like a lot of high frequency detail on it because I'm going to end up texturing this thing, and it's so dark in the environment that this isn't going to be seen as brightly lit as it is in ZBrush. So that's something where, it's kind of trying to keep certain things in mind so that I don't spend too much time, because I could easily go in with alphas. So if I go into the standard brush, drag rectangle, in ZBrush, I've got a whole bunch of alphas. And so, which these I already have loaded. And so if I go to Lightbox though, and I go to alpha, and let me just go into one of these folders. These are all alphas that I've made to use for sculpting in ZBrush for doing environment stuff. These are all based on scans, and so meaning that I scanned a rock or I scanned a cliff face, took the geometry into ZBrush, and then did a MRGZB grabber. Let me see what the actual, well, it's basically a depth grab, just so you understand. So it's grabbing the sort of depth information of your model and making a grayscale image. And so that's basically what these are. And so what's cool is that they make really good alphas for sculpting, like a stamp. So I've got a whole bunch of them that I've made. So if I go up a directory, let's see, I've got some that are DEM files, digital elevation models that come from like satellite imagery. I've got ones that I made with a plugin called Filter Forge, which is a Photoshop plugin. It's kind of like Substance Designer. It's like a procedural tool, and you can make tileable procedural images with it. And so I've got a bunch of those. So, but the thing is, the ones that are in here are sitting on disk. They're not loaded into RAM. And so I'd have to double click on them one at a time. So like all of the ones I have here, I'd have to double click on them one at a time to load them, and that takes a while. So what you can do is, if you know that there's a bunch of alphas you're going to use for a sculpting session, you can just stick them in your alpha directory, like in your startup alpha directory in ZBrush. And then when you launch ZBrush, it'll already be loaded. It takes up RAM, so like if you're not going to use them, you should like move them out of there. But since I knew I was going to be maybe using them today, then like I already have them loaded. So if I go and grab one of these with a standard brush and drag rectangle, then basically if I click drag, it's going to add some detail, and I'm going to increase the Z intensity on that just so it's a little easier to see what's going on. So, and let's go and do it down here. All right, so you can kind of see that it's just adding some detail based on a alpha. So, and the nice thing is, since they're already loaded in RAM, you can see how quickly I can switch between them. So I can grab, you know, this one, and then go and grab this one, and then go and grab this one. And basically just switch between different alphas to create rocky type surface detail. But since I'm going to texture this thing with Mixer, and Mixer allows you to also create normal and displaced detail, I just don't necessarily have to go too far with it. So I think I'm just going to like mess around and sculpt on this thing a little bit. So I know I've been like talking, and that's probably just because I haven't streamed by myself, and so I just feel like I need to talk. But I'm going to now grab my Wacom tablet and sculpt on this thing a little bit, and maybe talk less. We'll see. But hopefully the stuff I've been explaining so far makes some sense. Ultimately, I'm just going to try and get this sort of purgatory between our world and Tartarus made over the next, you know, couple, well, let's say over the next month, hopefully. So yeah, so I think as far as sculpting, now I probably can get the music to be back a little bit. And I've got like a Twitch friendly playlist on Spotify of like fantasy music. So hopefully it's can't play anything you want. So I had to find something. So it's a decent playlist. It's like 11 hours of stuff. Some of it's bizarrely cool and some of it's bizarrely bad. So I apologize in advance. It's fantasy music that makes me want to play The Witcher. Hey James, you're teaching a character modeling course remotely next month, never taught before. Any tips or thoughts? I've always found that for teaching, which is different than streaming, because like I'm kind of teaching right now, but I'm really just being spontaneous. For teaching, I have always had a habit, sometimes a bad habit, of over preparing. So like I think comes from not wanting to run out of stuff to talk about. And so ever since like the beginning of Gnomon, if I had to teach a class that was like 3 hours long, I didn't want to end up in a position, because it had happened to me in like my early days of teaching, where like you have a 3 hour block and then after like an hour, you're out of material. And at that point you're like, okay, well, that's all I needed to talk about, but you still have a bunch of time left, and that's kind of awkward. So for me, I tend to just really over prepare, you know, demos, so that, and try to make personal work that explains whatever it is that I'm going to talk about. That's kind of been something that for me with teaching has always been important. So like a lot of the personal work I've done over the years has been me trying to have examples to show class, you know, and so whether it's learning World Machine or Speed Tree or ZBrush or all the random things I've taught over the years. So I'd say just over prepare. Because if you have stuff you've made that you can deconstruct, that makes life a lot easier. You know, and the problem is also, it's like people who work at studios sometimes can't bring in what they're working on. And so therefore, you kind of need to do personal work to be able to have something to show the students. What did Josh say? Spotify only serves you royalty-free playlists now. Really? Well, that's useful. But yeah, we've had a couple times, and I won't name names, where people brought stuff from production into Gnomon to show in class. But that's a no-no, obviously. So like, I don't know, whenever Matrix Reloaded came out, we had a teacher who brought in Zion, like the Maya file for Zion, like, you know, the big underground city, which was rad. And it was very cool that the teacher opened that up in Maya and we could see, you know, how it was built. Pretty sure he probably wasn't supposed to do that, but it was cool. And then a couple of years before that, we had a teacher who, again, I'm not going to name names, but he was Disney working on that dinosaur movie. If you remember, Disney made this like live action CG hybrid movie that had live action locations with CG dinosaurs. And he brought in one of the dinosaurs, and this was before polymodeling was a thing for movies, when everything was NURBS. Most of you probably don't know what NURBS are, and you're so lucky that you don't have to. But NURBS are a way of modeling things without using polys. They're spline-based modeling. You can still do it in programs like Rhino. Anyway, making a character out of NURBS took forever. It would have to have all these like separate patches, meaning like surfaces were made out of squares, kind of like the way you make clothing, like everything's made out of a square, out of a patch. And anyway, he brought one of the characters from Dinosaur into class to show his students. And the weird thing is that the next day, he got a call from Disney Legal. Somehow Disney Legal found out that he had shown that in class, and in 24 hours he got caught. I don't know how. Anyway, those are the only two examples I can give. It really never happens because you're just not supposed to do it, so people don't. But yeah, James, if you over-prepare, then you're not going to have time to be stressed because you're going to be so busy just like going over all your materials, you know? So, but it's, and the nice thing is I've always found that by, you know, teaching, you learn a lot about the things that you want to learn about, you know, because you're going to get asked all sorts of questions and then maybe do some research to be able to get back to that student later on. All right, I think I'm focusing more on talking than what I'm doing, so I apologize for making random shapes. Let me concentrate. Again, I haven't done much streaming, so hopefully I get better at it. Right now I just feel a little on the spot. So I'm going to take a swig of a drink. And I'm just going to scan the comments. So as far as hard surface, which do you think suits best? I think that there's a lot of good hard surface tools, and I'm not really a hard surface modeler. That's something that would be, you know, good to ask Josh when he's back on the stream. But these days, there's people that are using ZBrush because ZBrush has added a lot of tools for hard surface modeling. So if you look at people like Furio Tedeschi, and some of the artists that participate in the Sculpt Off with the ZBrush Summit, you'll see some, you know, people working incredibly fast doing hard surface modeling in ZBrush. A lot of people in the industry use Maya. You have programs like MOI, M-O-I, programs like Fusion, Blender's been adding a lot of modeling tools that people say are really cool. What I suggest is don't try to learn everything. Pick a tool and learn that tool. Maya is safe because so many studios use it. So if you're in a position where you're trying to get started and get a job and like get your first junior position, it's good to focus on using tools that are used at the studios. So that's where, like, you know, it is a good idea. But modeling is so similar between different programs that once you know how to do it in one program, learning it in another is not so bad. So if the only thing you can afford, let's say, is Blender, and that's where you want to start, then start with Blender. I'm sure you can model any form that you could think of using a tool like Blender. It's just some programs might have better tools than others. That might make something faster, but it doesn't mean you can't still do it. Yeah, if you're using ZBrush and Maya, you're fine. I mean, it's like there's nothing you can't make using ZBrush and Maya. There are a ton of movies that we all love where everything you see in there is ZBrush and Maya. So, but the nice thing with 3D is that new things come out all the time that make things easier. And that's when you see people jump from one program to another, is because it's going to save them time. So I think for a lot of us who jumped to ZBrush back in the day, it was because it was so much more fun to use ZBrush to sculpt a character than trying to do it in Maya with NURBS. And, you know, Maya's had sculpting like ZBrush since like version 2, but it sucks compared to ZBrush. It can't handle very many polys. They've changed it over the years to try and make it better, but it still doesn't compare to the ZBrush. Yeah, no, I think, you know, there's always going to be like tool envy, where like you'll see some video on YouTube that's showing a new tool in another program and be like, oh, I wish I had that tool. But it's not necessarily worth switching programs because of that tool, you know? So that's the thing. You know, but it's, you know, like me learning Unreal, like, you know, it took a while for me to sort of finally jump in, but now that I've used it, it's because of seeing things like Rebirth. You know, I don't know if you guys have all seen that film that the Quixel guys worked on using Unreal. It's like a short film of this beautiful environment that kind of looks like Iceland, and there's this vehicle that's racing through it. Like, that's one of the things where I saw that and I was like, oh my God, like that's all running in real time. Like I have to learn Unreal because it looked like so much fun. It's, you know, that's, I think for all of us, that's where it comes down to, is we do this stuff because it's fun. We do this stuff because we just want to make things. And yeah, we want to do it for a living, but it's because we like doing it. So when a program makes it easier to do something, that means that you can kind of get your idea out faster, and the faster you can get ideas out, I think the more fun you're having. Like 3D is way more fun now than it was 20 years ago. Oh my God. Like it was still fun at the time, but it was a lot of waiting. Tools were really slow. Yeah, it's like if anybody learning 3D today could like sit at a workstation from like the mid 90s to experience what it was like, you'd be shocked. And yet they still made cool stuff with those slow ass computers back in the day. Yeah, it's like, it's weird to think that like when Gnomon opened the SGIs, or Silicon Graphics computers that we had, those computers were crazy expensive. Like they were like $15,000 a piece, and which at the time was considered cheap. And they were only 133 megahertz. You know, like this computer has like 12 cores and it's like 3 gigahertz each. So that's 36,000 compared to 133. So it just makes you wonder, like, how did they make Jurassic Park in 1993? But the answer is you were always in a wireframe mode. You were never in shaded mode. You always had to play blast everything. Nothing happened in real time. You just had to be really, really patient to be a 3D artist back in the day. Exactly, IRIX. IRIX was the best though. IRIX was a great operating system. It was sad to see that go away because it was solid. It almost never crashed. It was so easy to set up networks and permissions, and it was so when Gnomon opened, it was all IRIX based, and then I think like 2000 is when we started bringing in Windows, when Windows NT happened. And when we got our first Windows lab is when we needed to hire our first system administrator, because there was no way I could handle, that on my own. Windows is too damn weird. But yeah, SGI, RIP, I guess. But yeah, they just got undercut by Microsoft and all the graphics cards vendors that were able to ultimately make cards that were way faster than what SGI could output. Yep, the whole Softimage story. Softimage is the the sacrificial lamb of the industry in a way. By it getting bought by Microsoft and ported over to Windows, causes huge delay on XSI coming out, which kind of screwed Softimage, because then Maya came out, Houdini came out, and everybody just switched away from Soft as it fell further and further behind because they were so busy dealing with supporting Windows. And then obviously Autodesk bought it, and that's that. Yeah, well, Maya, when it came out, was 50 grand. So like Maya in 1998 was 50, and there was modules as well. And then yeah, they finally dropped it down to 7. Yeah, I mean it's so much easier to become a 3D person now. No more XSI for Vitali. I know. Yeah, he was a big Vitali or a big XSI user for a long time. Yeah, it's like when somebody like Vitali is saying that XSI is his program of choice, and you see it basically get, slowly killed off by Autodesk. It's a shame. But I think he started using that MOI program. I don't know if he still does, but he did for a while. $180 a month for Maya. Yeah, I mean, I know that's still expensive for a lot of people, but it's like from a historical perspective, it is super cheap. But it's amazing that, people now who want to learn this stuff have access to something like Blender. Because a few years ago, Blender wasn't all that great. And so people kind of scoffed at it. So it's amazing how far it's come. So many studios have invested in it. Not meaning that they're using it, but invested money in the Blender Foundation to help its development, which I think is really cool, including Epic. I believe Epic invested money in the Blender Foundation to help them out. All right, I think at some point here I'm going to stop working on this and import that other piece that this fits into, because I think now I'm kind of doing stuff that's maybe not necessary. It's tricky to talk and work because then you're like not necessarily paying attention to if you're doing stuff you're supposed to be doing or not. So yeah, it gives me a lot of respect for people who stream regularly at because Pixelogic has so many people streaming now who are so amazing and just bang out these awesome sculpts in a couple hours. I mean, Josh as well. Yeah, I read about Redshift going subscription. That seems to be what everybody's doing. Ultimately, long term, I think people make more money because like subscription is easier for somebody to jump into because you don't have like the big upfront cost. But in the long run, you probably end up spending more money. It's like $20 a month, $200 a year. It's cheaper than spending $2,000 to buy something. But if you spend that, if you have that subscription for 5 years, you've given them more money. But Redshift is awesome. So I'm very curious what's going to happen with it now that Maxon bought it, because it seems like a lot of Cinema 4D people are still using Octane. So it's not like Maxon buying Redshift caused all the C4D people to jump over to that. Yeah, the ZBrush deal is amazing. Like, buy it and get all the upgrades for life for free. Yeah, nobody comes close to sort of matching what, as far as I know, what Pixelogic has for ZBrush. It's like each year they add so much stuff, and the fact that it's free. So yeah, I agree that I think Pixelogic's model is better. But Pixelogic's a private company. They're not this huge public monster like Adobe or Autodesk or whatever. So priorities change when you become a public company, because you have to constantly prove that your profits are going up and your sales are going up, and it becomes very money driven and profit driven. While I think Pixelogic is, even though they've been around for a long time, they operate more like a family owned private business, where they have a much stronger connection to their users than I think a huge company like Autodesk can. Autodesk serves so many markets. Yeah, Gentle Giant's been using ZBrush for a long time. Back in the days, Gentle Giant had so many traditional clay sculptors. I forget how many years ago it was. It was a few, at least maybe like 9 years ago, 8 years ago. Carl, the owner of Gentle Giant, kind of told all the sculptors, the clay sculptors, that they really needed to learn ZBrush. That that was the future of the collectible industry, the future of the toy industry. And we have, if you've seen pictures of Gnomon, I think it's in the video I played at the beginning, that go away. That we have that huge Neytiri in the store. So we have that like 12-foot tall Neytiri from Avatar. And the way I got that Neytiri was a trade with Carl. So we traded ZBrush classes for a 12-foot tall Neytiri so that his artists could take classes. So that's kind of funny. And we still have it in the store, and it's super rad and amazing. So yeah, I don't know if anybody at Gentle Giant would still be sculpting in clay. It's the same as that Sideshow. All of those Sideshow collectibles are made in ZBrush now. It's kind of sad. Like, I miss, going to studios and seeing clay sculptures. I mean, now you see 3D prints, and that's pretty cool. But it's like, even though I love all the digital stuff, it used to be pretty cool back in the day to go to an art department and see real paintings and real drawings and real sculptures. And, those days are not 100% gone, but pretty much everybody's digital. What is this music that's playing? See, there's some tracks on this playlist that are just, no. Sorry about that. Can you guys even hear the music, by the way? Sculpting room is your favorite room. You know, I think for a long time, I mean, we've had that sculpting room. It's moved a couple times, but John Brown started teaching sculpting at Gnomon in 1998, and I took his class the first time he taught it. I still have the sculpt I made in it. And so he's been teaching with us for a long time, and that room is always, like, whenever I give a tour, I would say that's the room we always spend the most time in. Like, everybody always wants to stop in the sculpt room. It's awesome, you know. And the thing that's cool is, I think thanks to ZBrush, our sculpting classes have, you know, kind of grew in popularity, because I think a lot of people saw the direct correlation between sculpting in clay and sculpting in the computer, because they're obviously directly correlated. But the nice thing about sculpting in clay is you don't have to learn software. So to just learn the basics of form, not be dealing with software, clay is a great place to start. I definitely recommend sculpting in clay and trying it out to anybody. Like, if, you know, it's always good to develop your traditional skills, especially if the younger you are, like if you're a teenager. I highly recommend focusing on your traditional skills before you worry about digital. You know, there's a lot of teenagers out there that want to jump straight to programs like Maya or Blender or ZBrush, but you know, if you're under like 17, just draw. Because all that time you spend learning software, if you're super, super young, I mean, the software is going to keep changing, but traditional skills like anatomy and form and function, you know, composition, those are the things that will stick with you forever. You took his class during quarantine? Oh, so you took John's class remotely? That's cool. Play some Deftones. I wish I could, but you know, the copyright thing with music on Twitch, I can't, or else I would. But speaking of Deftones, we just got tickets to see the Deftones at the Greek in LA in October, although it got pushed to next spring. So next spring, I'll be seeing the Deftones live for the first time, which I'm really, really stoked on, because I've wanted to see them live for a long time and never had the opportunity. So it should be pretty cool, I hope. I know it will. And it's at the Greek Theater, which for those of you who are in LA, if you haven't been to the Greek, it is my favorite place because it's outside. So it's just cool to see a show outside. And you know, I'm going to just scan comments because I feel like I could be missing some. How long did it take you to learn Unreal as a render engine pipeline from ZBrush like you have there? I want to open Unreal, but it scares me. I felt that way too. And like I said, I did the Unreal Fellowship, which is offered by Epic Games. And so every quarter or every 3 months, they have 100 people go through it. And I luckily was able to participate. So it's a 5-week course. So I went from not knowing a thing about Unreal and never using it to making that short that I showed at the beginning. So I think that's pretty amazing that, you know, Unreal is clearly user-friendly for me to be able to do that. So I think if you're already comfortable with Unreal, or with, let's say, Maya, Blender, a 3D program, Unreal is fairly intuitive for certain things. If you're just doing like scene layout, importing models and lighting them and texturing them and laying them out, you know, that's fairly straightforward, as opposed to, let's say, like learning the effects tools, which that would take a lot longer, which we really didn't touch. So I would say if you just watch some like introductory Unreal videos on Epic's learning platform, like learn.unrealengine.com or something like that, or you can get it through the Epic Games launcher. You'd be surprised how quickly you can kind of pick up the basics. So I kind of wish I didn't wait so long. I wish I just had kind of decided to jump in on my own instead of procrastinating it. Photography is a great way to learn. I agree. Photography is so important if you want to learn, especially if you want to be an environment artist. Like getting in your car and going for a drive and going camping or traveling, you know, like traveling, I don't mean expensive traveling, like getting on an airplane. I mean, like just get to know your city, get in a car. Very, very important for environment artists, you know, especially photography, because just to learn about composition, to learn about shape, to learn about form. And as a CG artist, learning about how cameras work ends up being really important, because things like f-stop and shutter speed and ISO and, you know, all of these things that you kind of are forced to learn about if you have a normal camera, like not an iPhone, but like, you know, a regular point and click camera that has manual controls. 3D programs have all that stuff. So understanding how that stuff behaves in the real world is very useful. Photography is fun. But yeah, no, I agree that photography is an excellent way to learn, a great way to learn about composition. It's probably the fastest way to learn about composition, is to take pictures and study it and figure out why one works better than another. Composition is like such a critical part of everything that's done in this industry. All right, I should save because I haven't. I'm going to jump to Maya for a second. So my desktop, by the way, like the images keep changing. They're photographs that I took on a trip to Death Valley a long time ago. Where's Maya? All right. So what I've been working on has been this area. So you can kind of get an idea of the scale of what I'm working on. And I need to probably start texturing that thing. But I think that I also am going to need to block this out. And the camera is never going to be close to this. So even though it's big, you know, the lighting is probably mostly going to illuminate the entrance here. So this is something that I could probably be really lazy about as far as sculpting. So I'm going to take a look and see how I blocked this out. So pretty simple. I put a hole in it. And so obviously that hole that you see right there is so that we can move through it. So this is something that I suppose I could send over to ZBrush as well. Any good composition courses? Off the top of my head, no. Because usually if you, meaning something that's specifically called composition, if you took like an environment design course, then composition would be a very large part of what would be discussed. Because ultimately when you're designing, especially if it's for like film or like a matte painting course, because you're going to be designing shots and environments to camera. And so composition is going to be huge for that. All right, I'm going to go and export this dude. So I'm in a Maya project right now. So like I'm in my Maya projects directory. And whenever I'm sending stuff between programs, like between Maya to ZBrush or Maya to Unreal or Mixer to Unreal, I use the data directory of my Maya project. And so in my data directory, I'll see, since I've been working on this project, I've got 2 ZBrush, 2 Unreal, 2 Mixer, from Unreal, from ZBrush. From Unreal is going to be like OBJs, meaning like if I download something from Marketplace or from Bridge and I send it straight to Unreal and then I realize I want to change the model, I can export an OBJ from Unreal to disk and then bring that OBJ into Maya or ZBrush, adjust it, and send it back to Unreal. So that's why I have a from Unreal and from ZBrush. So this is not the chamber entrance. This is the chamber entrance, I'll call it outer. And go back to ZBrush. All right, so let's see. Data to ZBrush. All right. There's that piece. I forgot I had this in here. This is the sculpt that I did for the cave entrance that's in the short. So in the end, we can see that similar sculpting, you know, looks a little lumpy, but once it gets textured in Mixer, it looks kind of cool, and then the lighting helps it look cool too. So, but that's not what we're working on now. Always keep your house clean as much as possible. I have to say that the Unreal Fellowship, it was such a rush. Like, it was pretty stressful to try and, you know, do that whole thing in a month. So yeah, like which you kind of saw earlier, my outliner in Maya, like nothing is named, nothing is grouped, nothing is organized. And I'm usually really anal about that. So now it kind of makes it hard for me to like jump into Maya and look at the outliner, because you can see like this is like the worst outliner. It's like everything's just at the root level. Nothing has a specific name. It's like cube 15, cube 16. Like, what is that? I don't know. Yeah, I tend to not work like that. It's just, it was such a rush that I was like, don't care, don't have time. And it just makes it harder to go back to it later. Anyway. All right, so now I've got that larger wall in here. So I am now going to save again, but then this gets saved to my ZBrush directory that I create in my Maya project. So that's something that took me a second to decide, like directory structure, like with Unreal, like how I was going to do it. And so for now, like I keep all my Maya stuff, like on my external, I have a directory called Maya and then Maya projects, and I've got a million projects in here. But if I go to the one I'm currently working on, which is this one, then that's where I'm keeping just Maya related stuff. And then anything that's Unreal is in a different place. I've created on my external a directory called Unreal, and that's where I decided to just have everything related to Unreal. So that's my projects, things I download from Marketplace, everything related to the fellowship project. Anyway, so I'm going to save this in here. Chamber entrance 03, chamber entrance 04. Okay. So now I can sculpt on this dude. And then as far as polygon count goes in ZBrush, I'm not really thinking about it. I know that some people are curious about like Unreal 5 and the whole unlimited polygon count thing. I haven't used Unreal 5 yet, so I am not in nanite land yet. I look forward to being there eventually. Obviously it looks amazing, and obviously YouTube is like full of people doing Unreal 5 Lumen nanite demos. And I'll use it eventually. It's just for now, like not yet. For the fellowship, they told us not to use it because it's still beta, and meaning it's buggy. And the current fellowship that's going on, which Josh is now doing, they've told his group to stick with 4.26 or 4.27, which will be out soon. Again, just because it's, you know, Unreal 5 is beta. And so since I'm working on a project, I don't want to have like some weird bug with 5 that has to do with, I don't know what. It could be like project corruption. It could be something really bad. So the idea of using beta software for a personal project, I'm not crazy about. You know, if it was like, you know, some beta sculpting tool that you were going to spend 2 hours sculpting in, where at worst you'd lose 2 hours of work, that's not a big deal. But, you know, if you're working on a project that's going to last a month, then, you know, that's why I'm kind of probably going to stick with Unreal 4 for a little while. Anyway, so I'm not using nanite, so I am concerned about polygon counts. So this piece of geometry right now is 68 polygons. Obviously it can be higher than that. So let's divide it. And oh yeah, I didn't add edge loops on this thing. So, but maybe that doesn't matter, because I can always just scale this thing. Yeah, I'm going to jump back to Maya for a second. If you saw it shrank when I smoothed it, and well, I know there's a way in ZBrush to probably keep it from doing that. I forget what that is, so I'm just going to do it in Maya. Yeah, totally. I mean, I got to be honest, like, I don't profess to be like, you know, I know a little about a lot of things, but not necessarily a lot about one specific thing. So like, if I'm like, I forget how to do that in ZBrush, but I know how to do it in Maya, I'll just maybe just be like, screw it, I'll just do it in here. But I don't need 3. But I can use a few. And that's fine. So I'm going to export that. Go back in here. Make sure this guy doesn't have any subdivisions. It doesn't, so I should be able to just import that back in on top of itself. All right, so now it's got those edges. Yeah, I probably need to take a day and learn ZModeler so I know how to insert edge loops in ZBrush. Probably seems weird that I don't, but I haven't used ZModeler yet, so I just don't know it. All right, so now it's not shrinking. Is there a render farm at the Gnomon workshop? You mean the Gnomon school? We do not have a render farm. So we have about 12 labs of computers, and so basically students will render on those overnight because we're closed. And obviously right now, because of COVID, we're closed. So we'll be reopening in the fall. But we don't have a render farm, so students generally just will render on computers. And so students will often render, on a couple computers, or if there's a bunch of computers free. I've seen students that'll launch renders on 10 different computers. While it may seem sensible to get a render farm, render farms are extremely expensive, not only to buy, but to set up and maintain. And then they obviously would need to be upgraded on a regular basis or a regular cycle. And we've never really seen a huge demand for it, to be honest. It's come up and people ask, but ultimately, and now with GPU rendering being so much faster, that's something that's become less of a concern. All right, how many polys am I going to go up to on this thing? 2.3 million? That's probably enough. All right, am I going to use symmetry for this? I guess I will save myself some time and use symmetry. Deck, go away. Okay, so how am I going to sculpt this? So I'm not expecting this to be something that's going to be super duper visible. So I'm not going to overthink this. Yeah, this will all end up in Unreal. And so what I will end up doing is I will Z remesh it and then send that over to Unreal. So I won't bother to manually topologize it. So Z remesh is totally fine, because for things that aren't going to be deformed or rigged, Z remesh is amazing. And so I will Z remesh it, and then I will also UV it in ZBrush. And that also works great as well. For things that are deforming, it's, you have specific requirements for your topology for things like the edge loop around an eye or the edge loop in a shoulder. But for things that are organic, far less concerned. And that's obviously the future of where things are going with Unreal 5, like I was talking about, where you're getting less and less concerned about polygon counts, and therefore topology becomes less of a concern for static objects like a rock or a cliff face. I have a Cintiq right here, And I'm not using it right now because you'd be looking at my back. And I thought maybe it'd be better to just use the tablet for today, and just so that I need to get like a second camera that's over there so I can switch. That's why. I'm kind of comfortable on either because I've actually spent more time with the tablet than the Cintiq. And so I don't know. I mean, I definitely like the Cintiq more for sure. And since I'm going to be streaming more this month, I'll probably move the camera. The thing is, I'm going back and forth between ZBrush and Maya. And because my setup here is I've got a lot of monitors, so you don't see them, but I've got a monitor there, I've got this monitor, I've got that monitor, and I've got my Cintiq. So that monitor up there is where I keep random stuff, like let's say Spotify or email. And then this monitor is where I would have something like Maya or Unreal. And then that monitor is where I would have things like Hypershade or the material object editors in Unreal. And then the Cintiq obviously is for drawing or sculpting. If I'm not drawing or sculpting, it's off, because otherwise, I have to turn too much to look at it anyway. So I have 4 monitors basically. And I've had a multi-monitor setup forever. Back in the day, it was harder because you needed to get like a second graphics card for a second monitor. Like the fact that new graphics cards can support so many monitors is so cool. But yeah, monitor space I think is, really, really a luxury that I really, really need these days. I'm so used to it. So that's a weird thing with streaming, is that you like only can see one of my monitors. Same thing that's weird with like doing Gnomon workshop titles over the years, is having to figure out how to limit things down to, just one monitor. So this is obviously a massive cave wall thing, but in a way, the fact that I don't think it's going to really be seen much means I can just mess around with whatever I'm doing on it. Without having to sort of plan it out. If it was a bigger part of the shot, then I would probably do a sketch first, because I still like to draw. Speaking of which, we are in August, which means that we are 2 months away from Inktober. Anybody in here do Inktober? Because that is really soon, which is kind of scary. Yeah, I agree. Having a second camera would be good. Oh, good night, Sadim. So thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit. Oh, you're in Mosul, Iraq. That's awesome. It's got to be late there. I got to assume that that's at least 10 hours ahead of LA. All right, things are starting to get a little faceted, so I'll probably divide up soon. All right, save. Am I in the right place? I am not in the right place. All right, so I've got that blocked out. Now, with both of them visible, I can see on this dude, I need to push it back a little bit. So I'm just going to switch to the move tool. Scoot it back. Then I'll have to work on how they integrate. What I should be doing is carving in this area instead of pulling out. When you need 10,000 hours to master a skill, how do you manage to do that for 5 different skill sets? It's just time, you know? So whenever you see somebody that's good at something, it's really just the difference between you and them is literally just time. So I understand that it's intimidating because of how much time is required and how much time may be ahead of you to learn how to do something, but it's still just time, and time goes by. So you really just need to, relax and just spend the time learning and doing, and eventually you'll get better. We see this every year at Gnomon. You get students who start and 2 to 4 years later, depending on what program they're in, like there's a huge difference between where they were and where they end up. And that's because they're spending 60 hours a week or whatever, focusing on learning skills. And, Gnomon students aren't learning one skill at a time because our program is a generalist program. So you're learning modeling and texturing, lighting, rendering, rigging, effects, compositing, you're getting exposed to everything. So that does make it, it's a lot in the beginning because you are being exposed to so many different things. But ultimately, with time, you will get there. So I think that, the 10,000 hour rule, I think is a little misleading because I don't think you can ever really, mastery is a weird word to use for things because you're always getting better. So like if you spend 80 hours a week doing something, 10,000 hours is going to pass in like 3 years. But I wouldn't consider somebody who's been doing 3D for 3 years to be a master. So there's some things that maybe you can master in 10,000 hours, but art isn't one of them. Talk to somebody who's been an artist for 30 years and ask them if they think they're a master, and they'll very quickly, at least like the most talented people tend to be the most humble. And they're the ones who will just point out that part of being an artist and getting better is being aware of your weaknesses. And part of being an artist is wanting to constantly evolve, which means you're constantly aware of the things that, okay, I've maybe gotten very good at this thing, but now I want to get good at that thing. So it's a constant process. So when you're, a junior and you're young, if you pick something specific and spend, a year studying anatomy, at the end of a year, you are going to know more about anatomy than you did at the beginning of that year. That's progress. So all that matters is that you can see and notice progress. It's like going to the gym. It's like, if you go to the gym and you see that you're getting stronger, it will reinforce the fact that it's working. And so it's like that with art. If you practice and try to learn Unreal or try to learn ZBrush or try to learn anatomy, if you really put the time in, let a couple months go by and compare what you were doing 2 months ago from what you're doing now, and you should see that it's better. It doesn't have to be dramatically better, it just has to be better. With time, eventually, you'll be where you want to be. Because look at any artist that you admire, and you know, if you look at the work they were doing when they were 12, it's going to look like the work of a 12-year-old. You know, it's very rare that that's not the case. I hope so. I mean, I think it's it just applies to everything. It applies to cooking. It applies to playing guitar, you know, playing the piano. It's like it does take a long time to learn how to get good at stuff. But if you like doing it, it's fine because you're going to have fun. That's the key. Like, you're only going to get good at something you like doing. But like, if you think learning, you know, let's say you start playing with Unreal and you think it's really, really fun, and you start spending 8 hours a day with Unreal learning it because you think it's super fun to learn Unreal. Well, what does that mean? It means you're learning Unreal. It means that time's going to go by and eventually you're going to be like, oh, I actually know it pretty well. You know, that's what happened to me when I was in my 20s. You know, it's like I got obsessed with learning Power Animator, which is the program that came out before, or that was a precursor to Maya. And I just got obsessed with learning it because I was just, I don't know, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Like, Myst came out and I got obsessed with the video game Myst, and got like a 3D program for my Mac, which was not very good. Started learning that. And I don't know. I just thought it was so much fun to learn 3D. Like, all I wanted to do with my every waking moment was just like try and get better at it. And then once I kind of got good enough with 3D to be able to make a living at it is when I kind of started to realize, like, okay, like now I know the tool, although I'm not necessarily a very good artist. So, you know, you gotta focus on both. And the being a good artist thing, like, that's the thing that for the rest of your life you're gonna be like, and I suck. Because all you gotta do is go to ArtStation and feel that way. Because there's a lot of really talented people in the world. But ultimately, you got to try and just be inspired by that as opposed to, you know, frozen by it. You know, you don't want to go to ArtStation and see amazing work and then all of a sudden feel like, oh, why bother? Because it's like, well, that's not a healthy perspective. You don't have to be some badass person who gets the top row at ZBrush Central to get a job. You know? So those people are out there, and they may be art directors and leads and supervisors. And, you know, you can be one day too, but that's not how you start. Lee Gibbons. Just watch your Unreal shorts. Awesome. Thank you. What other software was used for that, or just ZBrush and Unreal? ZBrush and Unreal and Maya. And so Maya is what I used for layout, just to block out the sets. Quixel Mixer I used for texturing. And I think that's basically it. So I thought I was going to have some trees in there, so I thought I was going to use Speed Tree, but I ended up not having any time to really put any trees. Speed Tree is what I use for trees. It might be fun to play with Mixer a little bit. I guess we could do that. Let's see. Mixer I haven't shown yet on the stream, but Mixer is from Quixel. Let me save what we're doing. But yeah, if I launch Mixer, so Mixer is free because it's part of the Quixel set. And again, when Epic bought Quixel, they made it all free. So Bridge is free, Mixer is free. I got to sign in. So let me just do that real quick. If I can remember. Is it gonna work? It's loading. Okay. So this is Mixer. And so when you launch it, it's just basically showing projects that you already have open. And basically, if I launch Bridge again, which I showed for a sec, it's like an ecosystem. And Quixel's been around for a while. They originally had some plugins for Photoshop that you could use for editing normal maps, and they were pretty popular. And then over the last decade, it's evolved quite a bit. And now Quixel is like an asset company, basically, via photogrammetry, meaning scans. So this library of stuff that I showed earlier is both surfaces and models, right? But for the surfaces that are in here, if you were to go in and take a look at something like, okay, I'm going to look at some coal. Okay, I want to look at this one, coal ash. Then I can click in here to sort of see it full screen, and I can see what that material looks like. But it's just like a material, right? So here you can see what it looks like if it's tiled, and you can just sort of see it grayscale. So let's go and sort of look at something else. I'm going to go to ground. And this one's called Rocky Step. So I'm going to click on that, make it full screen. Pretty cool. So the stuff that's in, Bridge, and you'll see this in Mixer when we get there in a second, looks amazing because it's real, right? This isn't Substance Designer. This isn't procedural. Like, people make amazing things with Substance Designer, but since it's procedural, there's pros and cons. The pro is that it's procedural, right? Which means unlimited resolution. Right, procedural means you can get as close to it as you want. You're not going to see pixels, But when something, where to go? But when something is, let me pick another one. Let's say this one. But when something's based on a scan, it's based off photographs, right? So a bunch of photographs are taken, and from the photographs, from different angles, you end up with a 3D model, photogrammetry. And Quixel's doing it with a proprietary scanner, they say, that through the scan captures all of the material channels that are needed to recreate this object with the proper material properties based on a PBR workflow. So meaning that you have, if you look inside this object and we look at, let's say, I thought I was signed in. Oh, I signed into Mixer. I didn't sign into Bridge. So one sec, let me just sign in here. Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. I'm always surprised when I remember a password. All right. So now that I logged in, so if I go and look at one of these surfaces and I click on this little gear, and again, this program's free. Like, if you haven't played with it, like, download it. It's rad. And it's got all of these things. So I go to download settings, and you'll see that for this surface, it's got albedo, normal, displacement, ambient occlusion, metalness, for all these channels, right? So their scanning solution and the way they're generating these are producing all of the channels needed to create a shader or a material that will be accurate in the way that that thing reacts to light. And that's very different than the texture libraries we were all using 10 years ago or 20 years ago, where you got like a color map, but you didn't necessarily get an accurate bump map or displacement map. And you had to kind of make that yourself by making a grayscale and going to Photoshop and adjusting levels and doing all these things to kind of make your own maps for spec and reflection. And it worked all right. Most of the content made in the last 30 years was done that way. But what's cool with this is that it's got all the channels. So it saves you a huge amount of time and it looks amazing. So if I go inside here, and let me just scan the comments because a couple are popping up. Yeah, similar to Substance for sure. When am I going to be streaming again? Next Wednesday. I'm taking over for Josh while he's doing the Unreal Fellowship. So I'm going to stream every Wednesday from 2 to 5 is the plan. Let's see. What do I think about Blender? Blender is awesome. I don't use it, but I just see the work that Ian Hubert does and it's rad, and that makes me respect Blender. So I can't really say much more than that. It seems really promising. I don't know if I'll use it because I know Maya already. So I don't know if I don't feel a big need. Like Unreal is kind of filled a position that Maya couldn't do, but Blender seems a little redundant with Maya since I already know Maya. All right, back to Quixel. So with Bridge, the thing is that if I export one of these materials, it's just that material, right? Like how do I blend them? And so before Quixel made Mixer, blending these was kind of tricky because you have all these channels. So you have like rocky soil ground, and then maybe you've got this one, which is mossy forest floor. But then like, how do you blend these together when there's like all these channels, meaning you've got your color maps and you've got your bump and your displacement. And it's like, there's different 3D paint programs that existed over the years, like from Deep Paint to Mari, where you could create brushes and pump in all these channels, but it was really time consuming to set up. So I think that's part of why they made Quixel Mixer was to Jared. Hello. That's nice to see you in here. I remember having you in class, although I don't remember what that year that is. Although it's probably a long time ago, which is kind of scary. It was like 10 years ago. So what was I talking about? Bridge. So yeah. So the reason they made Mixer, I think, is to make it easier to blend something that otherwise is kind of complicated. So if I go into Mixer and let's say I guess I could open one I already have. Well, I don't have to. Let's make a new one. So if I make a new, well, first let me show you something that's already made. So I've got all these statues in here. So these are statues that I grabbed from, some of them are from Marketplace, most of them are from Marketplace that I used in my short. And but I needed to retexture all of them because all of them, when I downloaded them, were very clean. So like a clean white marble statue, and I wanted them to look, if you recall, let's just go, and since it's been a while since I've had that open, so I'm just going to go to Unreal Fellowship Project, and it's in sequence renders. These are all my renders, movie render queue, but MP4, and then here. So there's a few spots in the short, and let me just turn on, okay, audio's off, where we have statues. And so if I go here, for example, like this one I retextured to make it look old and weathered. All the ones that are on the bridge, so I retextured. So like, let's go back. So like that one, because it was just like a white clean marble and I wanted it to look like it's been outside and is weathered. So luckily with Mixer, that's fairly straightforward. So if I go in here and grab one of these, it might actually be, this is probably the one that I just had in that shot, and I open it. I haven't opened this in like a month and a half, so hopefully it still opens correctly. But the idea is that Mixer accesses the entire Bridge library of materials. And so in here, you can see I've got that statue of the girl retextured. And so it's retextured using the Megascans library. So if you're using Mixer, you actually don't even have to have Bridge open. So meaning that everything that's in Bridge, all of these materials are actually in Mixer if I click on the Online tab. And so in the Online tab, you can see, I can go and see everything that's there. So if I go to, let's say, ground, go to stone, you can see these materials. So I can load these materials with all their channels directly into Mixer and blend them together on models. So without having to worry about importing all the different channels manually. So it's really cool. So for this guy, or for this statue, I'm just turning off all the layers. And the nice thing with Mixer is it's actually a fairly, oh, it's playing bad music again, sorry. If I look in here, this is just a solid. And then this is what I use as like a base color, which is just called Rock Wall, which is a Mixer material. So it looks fairly clean. And I can rotate the light around on this. So I started with like a fairly clean base, and then started layering some dirt into some of the cracks, and then some more dirt on top, and then some more on top of that, to eventually get this to look like it was old and weathered, as opposed to like brand new marble. And it's all done in a layer stack that's non-destructive. And so it's a hybrid between using photo-based textures like you would in a regular 3D paint package, as opposed to something procedural. But it still has procedurals like noise to use for masking, or curvature maps, or masks, or slope-based masks, which is kind of cool. So let's go and open something else. So if I go to like the stairs, for example, that I had open earlier, let's open those. So if I go into Unreal and click play, so again, in here are the stairs that the dude's on that I said were like a tileable texture, like a tileable 8K map to create this sort of huge staircase. So if I go over to Mixer, you can see here is, let me just make sure, yeah. So this is a flat plane. And then with this flat plane, if I enable displacement in Mixer, let me just make this full screen, you can see it's doing that. And then if I tell it to show me tiles, I can see, let me just play with the lighting in here a little bit. You can see how this tileable texture is really just texturing a flat, totally flat plane. And so Mixer can preview displacement. So enable displacement. I want to see how this is tiling. And this is kind of how I made the texture for the stairs. But the texture we're seeing on here is all coming from the Megascan Bridge library. So here I'm going to open something else. Is making animation in Unreal similar to how Maya animates? It's similar. It's similar, but it's got some huge differences that take a while to get used to. Unreal doesn't have like a timeline. Like if you launch Maya, there's a timeline at the bottom, right? Like you launch Maya, bottom timeline. There is a definitive time from frame 0 and on in Maya. Unreal, not really. And so being a game engine, it didn't really have the notion, I guess, of frame 0 to frame whatever. And so there's the thing called sequencer in Unreal that allows you to create a timeline, but you can have multiple timelines based on, like, you could have a different timeline for different shots in a cinematic that you're making. It's like parallel universes. And it took a while for me to get used to, but it's cool once you do. But keyframing things and animating things, curve editor, all of that stuff is super similar to Maya. So if you're comfortable animating in Maya, it doesn't take that long to get comfortable animating in Unreal. And the thing that's cool is there's something called Live Link that allows you to link. You can run Maya and Unreal at the same time and then link them so that whatever you're animating in Maya updates automatically in Unreal. So you can actually animate in Maya while seeing it in Unreal. and then you can bake it down once you need it to be permanently in Unreal. So if you prefer animating in Maya, you can, and very easily go back and forth. But they've been adding, from what I understand, lots of animation tools into Unreal to make it more Maya-like. And then now they just added, or they, I guess, recently added control rig in Unreal 4 so that you can animate characters directly in Unreal. So I'm going to open something else. So yeah, so if I grab something like this, the nice thing is that once I had one statue textured the way that I wanted it to look, I could easily load in other statues and just apply the same. Well, let's see, here's one that came in broken. Don't know why, but again, it's been a while. I'm not going to try and debug this one because of time. So let's just load something else. But basically, like once I had it working for one, I could then load in another model and apply the same layer stack onto the new model. And so that saved a lot of time. Oh, weird. I'm getting some issue with some of these. Let's try and figure out where that's coming from. It could be that I was working on a different computer, and when I moved over to this computer, I didn't grab something that it needs, which is a bummer. I'll try and get it figured out for next week if I'm going to show more Mixer stuff. But I'm going to make a new mix just so you can kind of see what's going on. So this is just a flat plane. You can import your own models, but this is just a flat plane to start. So let me just scan chat. Do I think this will be used more than Substance in the future? I don't necessarily, because they're very different. So like if you want to have access to a massive library of photographic, photoreal materials to blend together, Mixer is amazing. But if you're needing to do, you know, even though it's a huge library, there's a lot of things that are not in the library. There's a lot of benefits to Substance in doing procedural texturing that has, you know, basically unlimited resolution. And then Substance Painter has a whole slew of painting tools that are not in Mixer. So like they're all cool in their own ways. And Mixer is such a small program, you can learn it in like a weekend. That's what I did. So like, let's say I go and grab Icelandic rocky ground. So that's online. If I go to local library, these are things that I've already downloaded that are here locally. And so if it's not local and I click on it, it would just have to download it. And so just to save us having to download something, I'm just going to grab something that's local. So let's go and look in here. And let's say we grab, you know, Icelandic cracked rock. That's a little dramatic. Let's say we grab this one. Icelandic sand rock, 2 by 2 meters. So that gives you the idea of the scale of it. And if I click on it, it's going to load it in and throw it onto this plane. All right. So there it is. And so you can see that Mixer is previewing the displacement. And obviously it looks really cool because it ultimately is, you know, it's photoreal because it is from a scan. So if I go to layers in here, then you can see that this material that was loaded in, which is from the Quixel library, is on a layer. And if I click on the layer, I can see inside here that I've got placement controls, height, and then all of the maps that were brought in. So you can see it's got albedo, metalness, roughness, displacement, normals, and occlusion. And if I were to export this from Mixer and want to bring it into Unreal, then I can basically, when I go to export, I can specify all of the channels I think I need. So like maybe I'm not going to be doing displacement mapping, so maybe I don't need the displacement. And then in the bottom right, you can specify the resolution. And so it can export up to 8K. And the export resolution, which is nice, can be independent of the working resolution. So there's, I don't know if it's a bug, but if you go into setup under texture settings, our working resolution is 4K right now. So what I'm seeing in viewport is 4K. But I can be working in 4K knowing that my source textures are maybe higher res than that, meaning the textures that are on disk that are being loaded in. And just for performance reasons, it can display it at 4K. But then when I go to export, I can choose to export it at 8K. Because if you try and have your texture resolution be 8K while working in Mixer, it pops up a warning saying like that I guess Mixer right now is unstable if you try and work at 8K. So I just keep the texture resolution at 4K while working. And then pretty much everything for my project I exported based on knowing how close to the camera it was. So if it was far from camera, I'd do 1K. If it was close to camera, I'd do 4K. And there were 2 objects that 4K wasn't enough in the short, where I ended up at the end swapping them to 8K. And so if I go in here and let's go through, so like the cliff that's here in the foreground, that is something that was textured in Mixer. So if I try, but the thing is, due to depth of field, the stuff that's close to the camera is kind of blurred out. We're seeing the stuff that's kind of far away. So a 4K texture was actually okay for that. And I wonder if I just load that in. Sorry, I'm jumping around. I'm just trying to cover different topics. Let's see, cliff. Let's see, maybe that's it. Substance or Mari? Mari is more for film. Like you're going to find that more if you go to like Weta or ILM. You're going to, places that are doing super high resolution UDIM based texturing, where like one model might have, multiple 4K or 8K texture regions on a single surface. That's where Mari really excels. Might be overkill for games. And so Substance is much more popular in the game space. Yeah, so this is one of those cliffs. So this is that cliff. So let's bring that here. So this cliff that he's on right now. So basically we're, the camera on this one is basically like around here, but with set dressing, meaning adding rocks and plants and stuff, this kind of worked out fine. And so if I look at the layers in here on this cliff, so if I turn them all off, and that too, you can see what the geometry looks like from ZBrush. So it's not super detailed. And then basically, I just started layering in some of the different bridge textures. And so you can see that this is clearly something that's just being tiled on that geometry. And then I layered another one on top, but for the one that's layered, this guy has a mask. So it's got a curvature mask. So that's what that says right there. So based on the curvature of the geometry, it's determining where to put this texture. So it's not just putting it everywhere. And then I've got another one on top of that. And this one also has a curvature mask. And then I have another one on top of that, which is basically that sort of top area, adding some dirt. So I didn't paint anything, right? I'm just blending surfaces together from Bridge or from this online library or repository of shaders. So it goes super fast. But the thing is that if you downloaded 8K versions of these from the online library, it's actually, super high res. And based on your camera and based on your lighting, it can work really well. So these aren't necessarily hero models that are being seen, with a bright light where you're going to overanalyze it, because in the short, it might be seen, in the fog, it might be seen with side lighting. And so that's where you're like going back and forth to see kind of like what's going to work with the lighting. So I can just work quickly because there was such little So yeah, let me go back to here. So what I was saying is that 4K worked fine, but then when he was going down the cliff, like here, I ended up set dressing it. So there's a lot of stuff from Megascans in the near ground to hide the fact that the 4K texture was maybe a little soft. And then here, when he was going down the cliff, is when I decided that the cliff would have an 8K texture on it. And then like here, even though we're super close to that cliff wall, and you would think that like a 4K texture wouldn't work because we're so close to it, with the depth of field, it's all blurred out. So it kind of is fine. Yeah, so shallow depth of field helps get away with a lot of different stuff. Yeah, and if in this shot, like everything we're looking at here is all, you know, ZBrush and Mixer. And the nice thing in in Unreal is that it's got decals. It's like layered textures. So if there was an area that I saw the texture looked a little blurry or a little funny, I could just layer a decal on top of it. And hopefully next week we can start bringing get this stuff textured and get some of it into Unreal. And you know, the idea is that I'll build out that chamber entrance over the next few weeks. Yeah, you can see this on Vimeo. If you go to the Unreal Engine Vimeo page, they have a showcase for the Spring 2021 Fellowship, and it's in there. And so just look for, you'll see it under my name. I mean, I guess some of the people that are in here maybe weren't here at the beginning. I can show it from the beginning. It's only a couple minutes long. What do you think? Let's see. Yeah, there was another shot here where it needed to be higher res. This one, because we're pretty close to the ground there. So those stairs, let's open that up in Mixer. Let's see. Bridge start, bridge span. How are the characters animated? Motion capture. So not motion capture that I did, motion capture that I got mostly from Mixamo. And so mixamo.com. And so if I go and load that real quick, I got most of the motion capture clips from here. And so Mixamo has a big library. I also got some from a site called ActorCore. So let me see if I can get that up. There we go. So some of the clips are from ActorCore, which is fairly inexpensive, you know, $1.50 for a mocap clip. And then some of them are from Mixamo, which is free, which is pretty cool. So if I go inside here and we look at animation and I click on one of these, then yeah, so you can basically take these clips from Mixamo and download them. You can also, I mean, the workflow for getting into Unreal is specific. That's something that you'd want to Google like Mixamo to Unreal to find the workflow to use. But basically there's a tool that somebody made to make it easier to be able to go from Mixamo to Unreal, where basically you can take the Unreal mannequin and upload that to Mixamo so that the animation is properly targeted onto the Unreal mannequin. And then you download those motion capture clips as FBX files from Mixamo. And then you import them into Unreal and then retarget them onto your character. And maybe in one of the streams we can go through that workflow. It's really fun. It's super cool. And then once you have all of these clips, Unreal has all these tools to blend between them, which actually is really, really fun. So you can basically load in a whole bunch of motion capture clips and then basically blend together a performance. Obviously, there's going to be some things that you might need for what you're working on where you're not going to find a clip, and that's when you want to have a mocap suit or a mocap stage and all that kind of stuff. But that's basically what most of us used for the fellowship. They did have, Epic has their own motion capture stage, as you would expect. So they did actually do custom mocap sessions for the students. So, but the thing is, that was like week 2 of the fellowship. And so by week 2, you needed to know what you needed so you could request it. And then they did this custom day where people could say, I need a character that's going to go to a table and pick up the phone. And then they would do that for you and you'd get the clip. But week 2, I still didn't know what I was doing. So I didn't, I ended up just relying on these 2 sites. For ActorCore, it's a different workflow. For retargeting, ActorCore has a plugin for Unreal that you install, and it allows you to import the clips from ActorCore and get them onto your character. So yeah, so it's pretty cool. I mean, Mixamo's super fun. Another thing that's cool thing with Mixamo, I did this on a stream a few months ago, where I took my own character that I made in ZBrush, uploaded the character to Mixamo. It auto rigs the character and puts the motion on it, so that you, from this free website, can basically get your character rigged and have motion capture put on it, and then bring it into, at the time I was using Maya and doing it for that. So that's where the character animation came from. So this is the, if we go back out here, I'm glad you find this useful. I have a habit sometimes, if I don't have a specific target, to jump around, and so I'm glad that some of you guys find it useful. I just try to brain dump sometimes, but it's my first stream by myself, so next week maybe I'll be a little more chill. Let's see, what was I going to show? I was going to show this. Yeah, so this that he's walking on, and so that's what I have open in Mixer. So, and again, you can see on the right, I've got a bunch of different layers. So if I hide these all, then this is the geometry that I sculpted in ZBrush. So I did sculpt, enough just so that it would have a silhouette that wasn't just a straight line. That was like the main thing. So not too long sculpting, but long enough to make that. And then basically in here, you can see I started with old stone wall 2x2. And so that's, and let me just rotate the light around a little bit. And that's just coming from out here. Then I layered on some Icelandic mossy rock. Let's get a little closer. And then if I click on that and go to the mask, that's masked based on normal and curvature. Normal, it took me a while to figure out what this is for. That's like slope masking. So slope masking meaning like this. So like if I want areas that are flat to get the texture, but I don't want areas that are vertical to get the texture, then I'm used to that being called slope or slope angle. But in Mixer, it's called normal. And so that's basically the mask that you're looking for that. And then this one is a charred brick wall. So I layered that into a few spots. So because you can also paint masks. So if I go in here, this is a paint mask right now. So if I make my brush a little bigger and I make it white, then you can see I can paint where I want these charred bricks to be. Or I can paint where I don't want them to be. So you don't have to do everything with procedural masks. Procedural masks are just like a nice way to quickly block things out. But you can, use brush shapes and paint. But painting less of like a substance painter type of painting, more of like we're painting where these materials are going, knowing that each one of these layers has all of these channels. Like that's the cool thing to remember. So when I click on old stone wall, it's got albedo, metalness, roughness, normal, and occlusion. So that's got 5 maps associated with it. If I click on this one, it's also got 5 maps associated with it. And this one has 5 maps associated with it. So there's actually like a ton of different textures that are loaded in. So when I go to this charred brick wall and decide I want to paint where, you know, it's going to appear, it's actually dealing with 5 different maps: displacement, normal, etc. under the hood. It's pretty neat. And then leakage. I don't know if I use that on this one. Oh yeah, it's over there. Let's just adjust the lighting a little bit. That's just darkening that area for some reason. I did it somewhere else. And then this. My navigation's a little funny because of the location of this in world space. Let me just get a little closer to this. Yeah, so you can see it's basically this texture. There's a paint mask. So here's where you can see it's starting to get a little blurry. That's because we're a little close to it for it being a 4K map. So that's where it'd be better if it was 8K. But the thing is that, again, since you can't have it display as 8K in Mixer without getting buggy, you just work at 4K, and when you export, you set it to 8K. So anyway, that's some Mixer stuff. Let's see. I agree with you completely, Pixel Venture. Combining Mixer with World Machine. So, I mean, you obviously can, you know, bring in a displacement from World Machine into Mixer, but the idea of getting all of those masks to play together is something that's a pain to do in Maya. And so that's something that I'm curious to try in Unreal. But I agree that if you had them fully integrated, it would be amazing. Let's see. So I also had the skull that I textured in here. This is a skull that I grabbed off of, I mean, I partially textured in it. This is a skull that I grabbed off Turbo Squid because I wanted like a pretty realistic skull. But the only one that I found, surprisingly, there wasn't like a realistic human skull in Bridge. I found this on Turbo Squid, but it was just the scan. So it was like a 2 million poly scan. It wasn't retopologized. So I had to retopologize it, UV it, and then to be able to get it into Unreal. And so, and it also, the texture for it was super, super clean. So I retextured it in here by just, oh, there you go. There's the base texture. So it's fairly clean. And then basically dirtied it up a little bit just so it would look a little bit more weathered. But the thing that's cool is it's probably something that I spent no more than like 15 minutes on. And so once you get used to Mixer, you start not feeling worried about retexturing stuff because you know you can just slap some of these scans on and blend them together, and it's probably going to look cool fairly quickly. So yeah. So the time-consuming thing for the skull was actually topologizing it because it's got so many holes in it. And so since it was just a super dense scan, ZRemesh obviously wasn't very happy about it. So it required a combo of ZRemesh and some poly modeling just to get it to work. Didn't take too long, but there was just a couple shots that I really wanted a cool-looking skull. And so, yeah, so I think that's that dude. What else can I show in here? Everything is world or in centimeters, and everything's at the same scale. Yeah, so my Maya scene, my Unreal scene, everything is in centimeters. And so if I make a, you know, a cube that's 180 centimeters tall, that's basically a person. And that's something that I've always worked at real world scale in Maya. And when we had the fellowship, that's what Epic recommended to us as well, was to use Unreal at real world scale. And so luckily, since the default units for Unreal and the default units for Maya are both centimeters, then it was really easy to go back and forth between Maya and Unreal, because I could just take my stuff from Maya, export as an FBX, import it into Unreal, and it imported the correct scale and the correct spot. That ended up being a lot easier than I thought it would be. I was worried that going back and forth would be harder, because also Maya is Y up and Unreal is Z up. But the FBX importer for Unreal automatically deals with that for you, which is really, really cool. Here's the cave entrance. Now, not everything that you download from, let's say, a site like TurboSquid is necessarily going to be on the right scale, but it seemed like everything I downloaded from Marketplace was all at the correct scale. There was nothing I downloaded from Marketplace that was coming in too big or too small. What I'm loading now is this guy. And so this is the cave entrance. So, you know, this is something that ultimately, it's like a lot of surface area, and but it still wasn't too bad. Let's go inside here. There we go. Let's get the... So obviously this is a lot brighter than it is. So that's kind of how I textured it, what it looks like in here. And again, we're seeing it at 4K instead of 8K. So that's why it looks a little chunky. But I thought it ended up looking kind of cool. I mean, considering that I'm just blending together 5 different materials. So this is the base that I obviously erased in this area. And then that's on top. Then another one based on a paint mask. And there are different, you know, I can use overcast in here, which makes it look more like it does in my scene, because my scene was overcast lighting for outdoors. So in Mixer, you can choose from a few presets for lighting. So if I go to overcast, now it kind of looks like my scene. And then this combined with the camera angles I used, you know, again, like there's no shot where we're this close to this stuff where we're going to see that's looking too low res and blurry and maybe should have been, you know, a much higher res texture. So you get the idea, hopefully, that with what I need to do with our ZBrush file is I'll probably end up importing that into Mixer and then using one of these as a start point to see if it looks okay, and then maybe start playing with the way things are blending. I'm just going to go and scan comments for a sec. So So I assume you bake all these layers to the object before moving it to the game engine, or could layers also be modified in runtime when the game is being played? So, well, what I was exporting from Mixer was all of these channels. So if I go to export for this, this is what I would export, which is albedo, roughness, normal, and AO. So I wasn't exporting displacement maps from Mixer. In general, the only time I exported a displacement map from Mixer was for the stairs that I showed at the beginning. Those I needed the displacement because displacement, you know, adds some overhead, and I didn't want to overdo it because I wanted to be fairly conservative. I didn't want to kill my frame rate for playback in Unreal. So I figured that I should just avoid displacement maps completely. And it wasn't until I got to the stairs that I was willing to give it a try, and it worked. So I'm exporting these 4 channels from Mixer over to Unreal. And so there's no baking going on. As far as the geometry goes, from ZBrush, this is another object that I Z remeshed. And so I Z remeshed it probably to like 100,000 polygons, and then created a normal map and brought that into Mixer. So I can bring my model from ZBrush and the normal map from ZBrush, or even a displacement map, but since I'm not dealing with displacement maps, I just model a normal. And then that's your start point in Mixer. And then once you export from Mixer, it's going to be the normal map, which is the edited version of the normal from ZBrush with all of the work you did in Mixer. And those are the channels that you're going to end up in. I'm just going to scan some more. Pixel Venture, thank you for the 3D creature development masterclass that came in a box. Yeah, that was years ago. That's awesome. That's cool that you watched that. Yeah, I think that was like 2009. But yeah, that was fun to do back when we had physical products before the workshop was all streaming. It was kind of cool to be able to make, you know, things that you would send in the mail. I miss that. In Maya, you can set what's pointing up in settings, not trying to be a smartass. I just saw it by accident lately. Yeah, you can change whether Maya is Z up or Y up. What's nice is you don't have to. So if you've been using Maya for a really long time, like I have, I'm just used to Y up. And so that was something that I was like, I wonder how weird it is to use Unreal and have to be in a Z up environment. Kind of like driving on the right side of the road in the United States and then going to another country where you have to drive on the other side, and you get kind of like, is that going to be hard? And I went to New Zealand years ago and had to drive on the other side of the street for a vacation for a week, which was rad, and it was not that bad after a day. And so Unreal, the whole Z up thing, like for the first day it was a little funny, and then like I didn't think about it anymore. But you know, I'm going to continue to use Maya as Y up because not only is it what I'm used to, I have like asset libraries and things that are based on things being Y up. And so the nice thing is it's easy to go back and forth because the FBX importer in Unreal rotates everything for you. So it made it pretty easy. As I already know, ZBrush and Substance, Unreal, and Mixer are now on my list. Going to ignore Maya for a bit. Yeah, that's totally fine. Like, don't try learning too many programs at the same time because that can be tough. So yeah, I think if you go to Unreal and Mixer, you're going to learn fast. You know, like I think that, you know, if I know that I'm not doing a like intro to Mixer talk right now, so I'm like showing a lot of things, but like just trust me, Mixer's pretty small. And so if you look at the UI that is in front of you right now, like that's it. There's not like a lot of buried stuff. So it's a really small program. You basically have your local library of things you've downloaded, the online library of like thousands of materials you can use for free. There's almost nothing in these pull-down menus. So basically it's your viewport and your layers, which if you know Photoshop, it's basically layers. It's layered shaders as opposed to, you know, layered 2D images. So, which is pretty easy to wrap your head around. And so really, you can see the amount of options that are in here is pretty limited. Like once you add a mask onto something, like if I go and add a solid, so I just added a solid white color onto everything. So it's basically, you know, not showing the color. It's still showing the normal map that's underneath, but it's just adding this color. So this solid color doesn't have any masks associated with it right now. And so if I go to the solid, I can choose to add a mask. So I could add something like a paint mask, which means I want to click on that. It's like a layer mask in Photoshop. So if I go to that and I change the brush size and I change the color, you can see if I paint with black, I'm basically painting like a layer mask. I'm saying like, I don't want this layer to be here. And so if I turn that layer off completely, it's gone. Turn it on, we can see where it is and where it isn't. So let me undo that. Undo a couple more, there we go. So that's a paint mask, so I can delete the paint mask. If I right click on it, you can see add mask stack. So instead of a paint mask, which is like a Photoshop layer mask, a mask stack is different because it's, if I click on that, on the right, you get these procedural masks you can add. So if I click on add mask component and I say noise or pattern, there's like, I know that for you guys, the font's like really small. Sorry about that. But if I go to noise and say like, you know, Perlin noise, and then I add amplitude, you can see that I'm basically adding a noise mask for where this solid white, you know, color is going. And you can see that if I click on that mask, I can adjust the seed value, amplitude, the frequency, and you can see the performance is, you know, super good. So, but I don't want that noise. I'm going to delete it. So I could go in here and say for the mask, I want something like curvature. And then for the curvature, if I start sort of adjusting this, you can see that now this white color is now just going on the parts of the model that have a tight curvature. So kind of like when you add like, you know, weathering to the edge of an object. So turn that off, turn that back on. So that's a procedural mask in Mixer. And then you have other ones as well. So let me just sort of scan. Is there a way to get Substance Painter or Designer for free? That I don't know. What would you personally recommend for making semi-realistic or realistic foliage and trees in Maya? Are paint effects still a relevant way to do so? Paint effects is fine for plants and like small plants and bushes. Do not use paint effects for trees. Speed tree is amazing for trees. So, but as far as Maya goes, yeah, don't try and use Maya to make trees. Like the problem with making Maya trees in Maya using paint effects is poly count. To make a really realistic tree, you need a lot of leaves and a lot of branches, and you're gonna basically paint effects can't really do that very well. And speed tree is so much easier to use. So it's, I mean, I know that speed tree costs money, and if you already have Maya, that's the issue. It's just making a tree that's realistic looking in Maya is very difficult because the tool is very non-intuitive in the way it's designed, but it's very easy for small plants and bushes. So yeah, if you need to do trees, I really would recommend something like Speed Tree, which was just bought by Unity a couple weeks ago. But you can make super realistic bushes and plants using paint effects. Is there a plugin for Cinema 4D? I don't know because I don't use Cinema 4D. Can I talk about atmosphere, fog, etc. in Unreal? I guess. How are we doing on time? How about we talk about that next week? So if next week you join the stream, it's going to be the same time next week, so 2 o'clock next Wednesday. Ask me about fog and atmosphere then, and then I'll be happy to jump into Unreal and show how that stuff works. It's so cool. I mean, that's probably of the things I got really excited about with Unreal. Was atmospherics and fog, because that's stuff that, you know, can take a really long time to render using any renderer, and the performance on Unreal is so cool for that stuff. plugin stuff. What's the difference between Quixel Mixer and Substance Painter? As you can see, Mixer is mixing, it's mixing materials together using a fairly limited amount of tools, but it's still pretty powerful. But since it's a small program, you can learn it really, really quickly. Like I learned Mixer in a weekend, you know, and I think I already am comfortable with 3D programs, but I think most people are going to be very comfortable with Mixer in just a few days. Painter is a painting program, so 3D Paint. So it's much deeper than Mixer. Mixer has a direct link to Unreal, yeah. All right, Leak, well, sleep well. There was a plugin that was integrating Unreal as viewport in Maya. Not sure what happened with it. Well, there is the Live Link plugin that allows you to have Maya and Unreal talking to each other in real time, which is really cool. So yeah, so I think what I still need to do is, you know, try and, I mean, something we could try doing is, since I've got this open right now, I can try swapping the model, although I need to retopologize it in ZBrush first and import that in, and we only have like 10 minutes, but I don't see any other questions specifically about Mixer. So let's go to ZBrush. Let's go to here. So yeah, so this guy needs to be textured. All right, so I'm going to hide that and just focus on this guy. So before I can texture this, I need to basically finalize the topology for it. And right now, it's 2.6 million polygons, which is obviously more polygons than I would want to send to Unreal for now, because I'm still using Unreal 4. So let me just go change that. So let's think about this for a second. I don't know if I'm 100% done with the sculpt, and I would kind of wait to be 100% done. Probably done enough, but lower this down and sort of see how many polys we have. So, all right, so what I'm going to do, if I wanted to get this textured, is two things. I need to Z-remesh it, then I need to UV it, because this does not have UVs. So to Z-remesh it, I'm going to duplicate this. So I've got this as a subtool, but I don't want to do something that's a permanent change to this. I want to keep this around. So I'm going to, with it selected, I'm just going to duplicate it. And then for the copy, that's the only thing visible right now, and I'll rename it. And so this is the chamber entrance, and I'm just going to call it, you know, Z-remesh. So I know what that is. And then down here under geometry, it's 2.6 million polys. I don't necessarily need to Z-remesh it at 2.6 million polys. And the reason is just because the topology that you're going to get from ZBrush is going to kind of be the same whether my mesh is 2.6 million or whether it's 600,000 or whether it's 164,000. But how long it takes ZBrush to remesh it will be different. So I'm going to go to like the SDiv 7 on this guy. And then I'm just going to delete higher and delete lower. So now this thing is 650,000 polys, which is, you know, fine to remesh it. Because you don't need all the little tiny high frequency details for the remesh. Then I'm going to go inside here to Z-remesher. And inside, I'm just sort of scanning comments. Looks like it says restream.io, but I think that's Adam who's joining us in the stream from Gnomon. All right, so I'm going to go to ZRemesher. As far as how many polygons I want this to be, you know, it's a large thing, but I think that I'll probably say maybe like, you know, 10,000 polys or something, because this level in Unreal isn't very big. There's not going to be like a ton of geometry in it. So because it is called the bleak divide, like I said earlier, so it's going to have, you know, set dressing, but I can throw, you know, 20,000 polygons at this thing and it won't be a big deal. But I'm going to keep it, let's say, target polygon count 10, and then I'm going to click ZRemesh and see what I get. And this is where you cross your fingers and hope you get something that looks okay. And very often you do. This thing has a hole in it, so I'm curious to see how it's going to handle that. But you can see it takes a few seconds. So if this thing was almost 3 million, then it would have taken, you know, potentially 4 times longer, because it'd be 4 times as many polygons. So we'll see if we're lucky. The main thing is that when you ZRemesh it, it's just going to be an optimized poly flow for the shape. And so it finished, and we can see it's 14,000 polys, so it's a little bit more than the target, which I gave it, which was 10. And so if we look at it, we can see, let's make the wireframe visible. So it looks good. I'm just sort of looking around. So, I mean, of the things that Pixelogic has done to make life easier, I mean, this is like pretty high up on the list, because, dude, before ZRemesher, you had to do this by yourself. And retopologizing was never fun. And it's still important to do it sometimes. Like I said, with the skull, I had to end up going into a few areas and manually clean the topology. But with this, we can see that it looks fine. It's 15,000 polygons. It's non-deforming geometry. And so it's kind of okay. Yeah, exactly. Imagine making, I've done stuff like that by hand. So it's, you know, I mean, I'm not going to say that at the time when it was just part of the process that you had to do, you just did it, right? And so you just put on music and zone out. But it was a pretty big time suck for something that maybe was relaxing once you kind of got used to doing retopology. But there's a lot of time spent doing something that's kind of ultimately non-creative. So the fact that you just click a button is like so awesome. So anyway, that's it. I've got the mesh. So the next thing I need to do for this is to unwrap it so that a texture can go on it. And so what I'm going to do before I do that is, if I go inside here, is I'm just going to save. And so let's go make sure I'm in the right place. And so chamber entrance 007. So let's save that. And I'm saving, saving between steps where ZBrush could crash, and like I'm happy with the way the topology turned out. Don't want to lose it. Don't want ZBrush to crash. So I'm going to save, because the next thing I'm going to use is a plugin called UV Master. And UV Master as a plugin, I mean, I haven't really had it cause crashes, but it's just safe. So, and how many professors did you have when I founded Gnomon? It was, I think, 4 of us. I think when Gnomon started, it was me, Darren Crumweedy, who's now my partner with Gnomon. So he joined as a partner in '98, in the second year. And Darren's awesome. And today's his birthday. So happy birthday, Darren. So it was me, Darren, Marcel, who I worked with at Alias Wavefront, which got acquired by Autodesk, and Marcel is still at Autodesk 25 years later. And who else? I think Jennifer Steinkamp was teaching. I haven't talked to her in years, not sure what she's up to, but she was awesome. She did a lot of trippy art installations with particles. I think it was us. That's like for the first term of Gnomon in 1997. So yeah, I think there was 4 of us. All right, let's try in the 2 minutes we have left. I'm going to go under Z plugin, and there is UV Master. So I'm going to dock it to the right. So let me just get this over here. So, okay, UV Master. So with this subtool, there's an option in UV Master called Work on Clone. And so I'm going to click on that. It just clones the subtool into its own tool. And then since this is a asymmetrical object, I'm going to turn off symmetry because this object doesn't have symmetry. And this is another one of those cases where you cross your fingers and hope for the best. So you can paint or enable control painting for where you want seams to be, and I use that a lot. But sometimes I just try to unwrap it without that to see if I get lucky. Because sometimes it puts the seams where you want them to be, and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to click Unwrap. And that went pretty fast. So now I'm going to click Flatten, and you can see what it looks like. So it unwrapped the model, and that kind of looks all right. I'm going to unflatten it, but I got to see where the seams are. So there's a button that's called Check Seams. And now I can see where the seams are. And, you know, that's like a weird place for a seam. Like it'd be better if the seam was like hidden inside that crack. So maybe I'll change that, but we're kind of running out of time. So, but the point being is like, it is acceptable what it just did. And if I want to see it with a texture on it, I can always go down here into the texture map palette and click and just grab a texture and see how that's going to wrap around the model. So basically my 2.5 million poly model, I've retopologized it using ZRemesher. It looks fine just by clicking the button for the first time. Send it to UV Master, unwrap it. That's also kind of acceptable. I think that if I was, so now I'm going to turn this off. So if I was going to be texturing this, you know, not using Mixer, you know, and it was for a different application, maybe I'd care more about the UV layout and trying to optimize the texture space, because you can see if I flatten this, there's a lot of wasted texture space in here, but I'm just going to end up throwing like a 4K or an 8K texture on it, and it would probably be fine. So let me go and unflatten that. So the next thing I need to do is get this exported and then get it into Mixer and texture it, but we are out of time. So I hopefully will have time to work on this between now and the next stream. And but we'll still have other things for the chamber that are going to need to be ZBrushed and textured with Mixer and all that stuff. So I think that's probably where we're going to have to stop. So you were 20 back then and worked on websites while reading books about Maya with your illustrations. That's awesome. Nerves 1, 2, and 3. There you go. Well, this was fun. You know, it's my first sort of art jam by myself, and I hope it was interesting for you guys. Thanks for hanging out, and I hope to see some of you guys next week, where we'll keep working on my Tartarus project, where the goal is just to get that guy into the underworld. That's what's coming, and it's going to take us, you know, a few weeks to get him there. And there you go. So it's 5 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next week. Later.